So welcome back. Okay, now we learned a lot of stuff about Python and Excel and how we can manipulate Excel with OpenPyXL. And now we get to the interesting stuff, to the actually workflow, which you probably could use in your daily businesses as well, merging different Excel files to one, the task, the exercise we had from the beginning. Um, so for that we need loops and need to apply all the stuff we learned now so far from Python basics and Python and Excel. Okay, so let's start with the idea of how we achieve this. The idea is we take a blank Excel file or maybe an Excel file with a header where we already know this is column A, this is column B, and this is column C, so date, product, and amount sold in our case. And then we open up uh, each Excel file we need to load in the document one after another, go through them row by row, take the row and append it to our blank Excel sheet. First of all, we're quite lucky because we already made our blank Excel sheet with a header line. In our case, that's playbook. We saved it here and we can now fill the Excel file playbook with the other Excel files stored in my data. We then would, in the next step, have to open the first Excel file in the directory, go through the row by row, load row by row into playbook or blank Excel file. Luckily enough, again, we already opened one of those. We already opened January toothpaste, right? And we stored it in WB, or short for workbook, in that object, in that variable. So at that point, we already have playbook and we have workbook. So now let's try the first step. If we can go row by row through workbook, take the current row and append it in playbook. So current row from workbook, take it and append it to playbook and see if we can transfer from one Excel file into another Excel file as the first step. So we merge one document into another. Okay, let's do this. Probably, as you already realized, row by row kind of feels like we need to use a loop. In that case, the best approach, at least I would use, is a for loop. And then we need our variable where we store the stuff into, which loops through whatever. And I would call that current row because I like to name my variables in a logical way so I know what it is. And the idea is we take the document, and as long as there are rows, we take the current row and load it into a variable. This variable we call current row because this is the row we currently have active. Okay? And as long as there are rows in which document we already loaded, and this is the workbook and WB, and from that we have an active sheet opened called January TP. So as long as there are rows in January TP, we are looping through the loop. This means as long as there are still rows, we go through the document and do this row by row until there are no rows left. Great. And what do we do? Row by row by row after row until there are no rows left. We need to fill up a variable in which we hold the data which is in this current row. And then we need to, after we fill that variable, we need to store that to our playbook. So the idea is we take, for example, an array as a placeholder, which we fill up with the values of the cells in this current row. Once we fill up that array, so we have completed the row, we go through this current row cell by cell, so column by column, so to say, fill this placeholder array. Once we're done with that, we append this placeholder array to our playbook. Then we go to the next row, go through that cell by cell or column by column, and append that again. So we need a variable as a placeholder. So let's call it placeholder array. The whole purpose of this placeholder array, and we say this is an empty list or an empty array at that point. The whole purpose of that is will be written with the values of the current row, and then after that it will be overwritten with the next values. So each time, each loop iteration, so each row, we initialize it as empty so we can fill it again. And if we go to the next row, this operation will override the old values of the array and initialize it again as empty so we can fill it from blank, because we do there each cycle of the loop. To check if that worked, that we emptied it, we can make a debugger print line, and I like to do that. I like to debug my loops, so I just put in each loop step a print to see if at which step in the loop I am. So in that case, I print the placeholder array. So every time the loop goes one cycle through it, I first will then have printed that I have an empty array in the beginning of the loop. And the next cycle, I will see again that there's an empty array, as we will see that every cycle. That's just for debugging for me, so I see if the loop works. Then we have the next step. We now need to fill this placeholder array with the values of the 3 cells in each row, because we know that we will go generate toothpaste, and in the first iteration we have the first row, and then we want in the placeholder array this value, comma, this value, comma, this value. Append that, these 3 values which we just stored in placeholder array, into our new playbook Excel file. Then we want to loop in the next row and fill up the placeholder array again with this value, this value, this value. Append that, go to the next row, this value, this value, this value. So now we are at a step, we're in the first row, we have an empty placeholder array, and now we need to fill this empty placeholder array with the first value, the second value, the third value of the current row. So we need another loop. For the current row, for this row, we want to loop through the cells until there are no cells anymore left. So we need a loop in a loop. Inside the loop, we write another loop for, we have current row. So for irgendwas, something in current row. And what will we have? We will have cell by cell. So let's call the variable which loops through current cell, because it's a cell. This means, so as long as there are cells in the current row, we loop through the row, and then we can look if that works by, and again, debugging, and we can print whatever now is in current cell stored, because this should be the current cell and the value, so we see at which value of the row we are. And then we can take our placeholder array, placeholder array, and we learned that we can append the current cell exactly value. And okay, that's it so far. So what we did is we have an outer loop running through row by row by row by row by row until there are no rows left, and it ends. And we have in each cycle per row, we have an inner loop which says, okay, I'm not only looping through the rows, but I'm first looping through the rows, and per row I'm looping through the 3 cells. Then I go in the next row, loop through the 3 cells, go in the next row, loop through the 3 cells, and so on and so forth until there are no rows left anymore. And I begin to go to the next cell. So I go in the first row, loop through the cells. When there are no cells more left, I go in the outer loop, which means go to the next row. That's what we built. Okay? So now we have in the placeholder array all the 3 values of the cell. So first column, second column, third column per row. And now we need to append this array, which has 3 values, so it consists of a full row as a new row to the array, the Excel sheet we want to append it to. And this is playbook we have on top here. So, but this is now important. We do not want to do that cell by cell. We want to do that row by row. So we need to do that in the loop cycle of the outer loop, because that's the row loop cycle. So we have to go 1 back. So we're at this order where we're in the outer loop cycle, and not in this order where we're in the inner loop cycle. So we need to be here in the outer loop cycle. And here we then say, okay, let's take the play sheet as we have it on top here, and we can append stuff, right? With that command as we already learned. So play sheet.append. And what do we append to? We could now take a list or an array, but we stored it in placeholder array, which should consist of something similar like this. So we can just type in placeholder array, right? So this means, and for debugging, we print that as well. So what we see now is we have 3 debugging steps. We have the outer loop, we have initialized an empty array. Then we go, and here we hold a row. Then we go into that row and go cell by cell through it. So we see each cell which we append to our initialized empty array. So it has a first value, then a second value, and a third value. Then it consists of 3 values. There's no values anymore left per row. We go to the outer cycle, append that to the whole array to the play sheet. We control that it's full of 3 values by printing it again. Then the loop is done. No more commands. So we go back. Okay, is there another row left? Yeah, we go from the first to the second row and do it all over again. Initialize it as 0, go cell by cell through it, go to the third row, to the fourth row, to the fifth row, until there are no rows left. Then we're done. We exit the loop because there are no commands anymore. And once we exit, we should now have playbook merged with the workbook January toothpaste. So we can save playbook here by saving playbook.xlsx. And now we hit play and look if everything works. Fingers crossed. Seems all right. Went quite fast. I'm scrolling to the top. What do we see here? First row, we initialize an empty array. Then, and I'm opening the Excel file, then we go in the first row, in the first cell, where there's 220, January 24th, exactly. The date is just formatted differently because that's how it's visualized, but in the backend, it's a date format, which is basically stored like this. Then it goes in the next cell, which should be toothpaste, correct. Then it should be 3, correct. No more cells left, so go to the next. But we give out once the full array, which is then exactly the date, format that is datetime format, 2 space and 3. And then the thing is done. It goes to the next row by initializing 0 as an empty array. Next line, first value, 6th of January, 220 for January 6th, 2 spaced and 1. Do that again, full array, next line. And we do that until we're done with the last one. It's the 3rd of January and 2 spaced, and we sold 1. And that's correct. So as you can see, it worked, and we see us in the next video.